Hey everyone, Steve from Backcountry Gallery here. I just got back from running 2 absolutely fantastic Galapagos workshops. We had so much fun on those workshops, but leading up to the workshop, we had a lot of questions about what kind of gear, what kind of bag, what should I take? There's weight limits involved with a lot of these flights, so you really have to pack the smartest way possible, take the best gear you possibly can. So I'm going to show you what worked, what didn't, and what I would do next time. And let's just get started here. So we have a lot of ground to cover. We're going to talk about 2 systems though. This is my wife's system over here. She shot Nikon this time. I shot Sony this time because I'm writing a book about the Sony A1 Mark II. So I have a pair of those right here, but we're going to get into the gear in just a minute. First, let's start with the bag and kind of work our way over. So the first thing is the bag. If you notice, this is not my normal bag. This is not my beloved Gura Gear 30L. This is an Ortlieb waterproof backpack, and it is not even a camera bag. This isn't a camera bag. This is just a waterproof backpack, and I bought an insert from B&H for my camera gear. So that's what this is here. And you might be wondering, why are you using this bag instead of your 30L? And the reason is simple, because it's waterproof. The thing is, there are multiple reasons to have a waterproof bag in the Galapagos, and I'm going to give you kind of a harrowing story here in just a minute, but let's just go over some of those bullet points. First, it can rain at any time, especially the time of year we like to go. We like to go a little bit in the rainy season so that we have cloud cover and things like that. It worked out so well, by the way. It was such a great trip. But the thing is, it could rain at any time. We're not going on super long hikes, but the thing is, you could be a mile, mile and a half from the boat, and a deluge comes. And when it rains there, it's serious. So it's nice to have a waterproof backpack. Now, I realize you can put a little raincoat on some of the other backpacks, and that works well too, but it's just that extra level of security. The other thing is that when you're going to and from the boat, you're always on a Zodiac. So they're always passing your camera gear between the boat and the Zodiac. And nothing fell in the water this time, but there's not a guarantee that, it might not in the future. So if this falls in the water, not only is the gear protected, but it also floats. Take a look. I did a little bathtub check here, and you can see this thing floats no problem at all. That was with all of my gear in it. Floating no problem at all. So if this were to fall in the ocean, we could just fish it right out. No harm done. The other thing is that we do what's called a wet landing many times, and you're going to end up doing this no matter whose trip you're on in the Galapagos. Basically what they do is they take the Zodiac, they back it up to the shoreline, and you get out into the water, usually about knee-deep water. But again, you're passing camera gear over that water. So there's a chance that, even if you're not handling the gear, even if the ship's crew is handling the gear for you, they might slip and fall. And again, a regular camera bag, if you dunk it in the ocean, that water's going to infiltrate just like that. With this one, not a chance. And now the harrowing part, the harrowing story. One of the landings that we did was in particularly rough water. And so we backed the Zodiac up, and we're trying to get out. And as people get out, the Zodiac gets a little bit lighter. And I was one of the last ones out. And a gigantic wave, not one, but 2 gigantic waves, washes over the top of this thing. I mean, it's drenching. It's like someone was holding a 50-gallon aquarium and they just lunged all the water at us. It was that wet. And you had water in the bottom of the boat afterwards. It was that much water coming in, and it just absolutely drenched everything. But this bag, right in the line of fire, no problem at all. Not a single drop penetrated this bag. And then, like I say, it happened again. And then when we went to leave, we got hit by waves again, and this bag got drenched like 3 or 4 times, and not a drop of water got into this bag. So again, I think this is a great bag for the Galapagos. Would I use it anywhere else like Africa or Costa Rica or something like that? Probably not, no, because it's not a dedicated camera bag. I think the 30L Gura Gear is the way to go for most trips. But if you're in a situation where you're facing water and potentially getting cameras wet, this is a lifesaver. And it's got a nice little metal frame, so it's surprisingly comfortable to carry. So let's go ahead and talk about what I have in that bag. Now, obviously, we had the insert right here. This is where I put all my camera gear, and it's pretty simple right there. I got that from B&H, and I will put links to all of this stuff in the description area so you can reference it if you want. So what was actually in the bag, though? So let's take a look. So first, I have this black rapid strap. This is fantastic for a lot of things, but for me personally, no, it wasn't. The problem is this. I like the black rapid strap. It is really nice. My wife's laughing at me, but I really like the black rapid strap for just, general photography. I was kind of skeptical, but it is nice to have 2 cameras hanging off of you and be able to grab either one. So nothing, no disparaging here. This is fine. It's because of the way I shoot. I like to get low. I'm either squatting, I'm sitting, or I'm on my belly and I'm looking through that viewfinder. And what happens when you have two cameras on a black rapid strap and you do that? One camera's in your hand, nice and safe. The other one is either in sand, dirt, bouncing off of lava rocks, sharp lava rocks, or worse, it's in the water. So this did not work for me. I tried it for a few days. It just didn't work. So for me, it was better to have everything set up and ready to go in the camera bag and then grab the cameras that I needed as I needed them. However, if you're not a get down on your belly kind of person, guess what? Maybe that Black Rapid works really well. My wife was using it. She has a counterpoint to this. She thought that it was fine. She used it all the time. But for me, because of how low I like to get for my shots, and these animals are small, and when they're on the ground, I like to get down to eye level. And if that's you, then this Black Rapid would be kind of a pain. If you're like, hey, I don't care, I'm just going to kneel or stand, my camera's not going to hit the ground, then you're fine. So moving on. Let's take a look at some of the other stuff I took. We're talking about waterproofing. So I have a nice little waterproof camera, disposable camera sleeve here. These are nice. Unfortunately, the one time I needed it, guess what? I left it on the boat. I just grabbed the camera and the lens and jumped off and we ran away. And but I wish I would have had it. It's really nice. I would highly recommend taking this because sometimes shots in the rain are really cool, like you see with this penguin right here. Next, let's get into some of the cleaning supplies because you need cleaning supplies. You're dealing with sea spray, you're dealing with sand, you're dealing with dirt, all sorts of stuff. So I have some of these microfiber cloths. I get these really cheap from Amazon. Again, link in the description area if you're interested. And these are great for just wiping the camera off. You can get them damp and kind of wipe the camera down when you get back. If you get sand and grit in them, throw them out. Don't try to wash them. Just get rid of them. They're cheap because if they get sand and grit in them, they're not a microfiber cloth anymore. They're sandpaper. So we don't want to rub sandpaper on our gear. So I use this to clean this kind of stuff off here. If I have a nice clean one, I might gently wipe some of the heavy stuff off the lens after I use the rocket blower. We'll talk about that in a minute to get some of that excess sand off of there. We don't want to grind sand into anything, right? So we have those. Sensor cleaning. This is in no particular order, by the way. Sensor cleaning, sensor fluid. Just because you can get stuff. We definitely had some sensor cleaning going on during this trip. More cleaning stuff. So let's go to the rocket blower. These are great. There's one that with a filter. I keep forgetting to buy it. I'm going to try to get one for my next trip. But either way, as long as you have something where you can blow stuff off your sensor, blow stuff off your lenses, especially there, it is so critical because again, if you get sand or something on your lens, you don't want to use a microfiber cloth or even a lens wipe or something. You got to get the sand off before you do any kind of wiping or you're going to scratch the front element. You don't want to do that. So you need something like this. And again, this works really well for sensors. A lot of the sensor dust that we encountered on this trip, we were able to blow off with one of these rocket blowers. It's fun to do this too. What else? Okay. And of course, lens wipes. I like my little lens wipes. So once I get this nice and clean, no dust, or I'm sorry, no sand on it, and it's just down to dust, then I'll just go ahead and wipe those off with these little lens wipes. And again, make sure you take enough. I'm showing you 3 of them. I take a lot more than that. And let's see, moving on here. I have a little bit of gaff tape with me. Usually I wrap this around a tripod leg, but I didn't have a tripod, so I wrapped it around a little bit of PVC. Fortunately, didn't need it, but sometimes you just need to repair something, and gaff tape is the new duct tape. So there you go. Next, I have a couple of little Sunbelt Bakery granola bars with me, just so that if I'm hungry, I can grab something to eat when I'm out there. I always have a water bottle with me. That's not shown here, but keep a water bottle with you if you're in the Galapagos. But that way you can have a little snack there on the island. Work up an appetite shooting all that stuff. Moving on to one last thing here, we have some bug wipes. Obviously, you want bug wipes. I found that the mosquitoes weren't quite as bad as I thought they were going to be there, but there were a few times I was glad I had the bug wipes. One more thing over here. I'm going to pull this up before we get into gear. And that is a very, very lightweight raincoat. I keep that right in I stuff this into the top of the backpack. So if it starts raining, I have a raincoat. Although sometimes it is so darn hot, you're like, you know what? I'll just get wet. But either way, it's nice to have it. And I have a pair of body and lens cap ends here. So if you are traveling with your camera disconnected from your lens, this is critical because you don't want to be in a situation where you lose, especially you don't want to be in a situation where you lose a body cap and then you have a sensor exposed and no way to get the camera home. If I lose a front cap or a end cap to a lens, I'll just take one of these microfiber claws, kind of wrap it around there and it's fine. But not for a camera. You have to at least have an extra body cap there. It's very easy to lose these, so make sure you keep some spares there. Moving on to some gear stuff here, we have a couple of batteries here. I didn't end up using any spare batteries, believe it or not, on this trip. I just basically charged these cameras as needed, and it was fine because you'd go out for a few hours, you'd come back, and plug your camera in. You go back out in the evening, and then you come back, you plug your camera in, and never had a problem. But I still recommend an extra battery for each camera that you take with you, and I do recommend having 2 camera bodies. Hey, by the way, if you would like to join us on our next Galapagos trip, we are going to be releasing the 2026 trips in just a few days from the launch of this video. So make sure you sign up for my free email newsletter so you can get a notification when that trip is happening. If you don't sign up for the email newsletter, it's going to be very, very difficult to get on that trip because they sell out so quickly. So make sure you head to the site, sign up for the free email newsletter, and you'll get a notification when the trip is happening. And by the way, if you're watching this after, a week or two after the video is published and you missed out, remember there's 2 great times to sign up for that email newsletter. The first one was before the trip. The second one is right now, so you don't miss any other trips. So make sure you head to the site, sign up, and I hope to see you in the Galapagos. Speaking of which, the camera bodies in this case are both Sony A1 Mark IIs because I'm writing a book about these, so I needed to take these cameras so that I could, do that, work on pictures and information for that book, but they both worked out really well, as you would expect. There's not really any special camera requirements for Galapagos. Okay, not really. So the camera bodies worked fine. Pretty much any bodies worked fine. Moving over here, this is my wife's outfit over here. She has the Nikon outfit, and she had a Z8, Z50 Mark II. Again, worked out fantastic. This little guy, by the way, was the surprise. This little Z50 Mark II, way better than I had thought it was going to be. She hooked this to the 100 to 400, and since this is a DX camera, it gave her an effective field of view of 150 to 600 with the 100 to 400 lens. And let me tell you, that's almost all you need. That's almost all you need. We're going to look at focal lengths here in a little bit, but that was fantastic. That worked out really well. She also had the Z8 with her, which she used with various lenses here. Moving back over to the Sony stuff, I had the 100 to 400 for the Sony as well. And again, we're going to talk about focal lengths, but let me tell you, the 100 to 400s are really the superstars here. You can really do a good Galapagos trip with just a 100 to 400. I also had the 300 2.8 because I like to have a fast prime with me. And this lens seemed like it was going to be perfect. And honestly, this worked out really, really well. I shot a lot at 300 2.8. I shot a lot with the teleconverter, so I was at 420 f4. And then I had the 2x converter, so I can get up to 600 at 5.6 if I wanted to. And this lens worked fantastically well. No complaints at all, other than I found the AF accuracy with the 2x converter not so great all the time, but it did a decent enough job. Sharpness across the board was pretty good. So, yeah, especially at 300 2.8. Boy, this thing is razor sharp. Really good little lens, but it's nice and light, works out really well. And as you'll see when we talk about focal lengths here in a moment, this was definitely one of the lens I used most, just this setup exactly like this, no TC. It worked out really well. And the reason I have this lens and not just this, because you could just about do this with a 100 or 400. But the reason I had this was so that I could get out to 600 if needed. But I also am a fan of subject isolation. You guys have watched my videos before. You know how I am. And I like to be able to get down to 2.8 to kind of get a little bit more subject isolation. And I can't get to 2.8 with my 100 to 400, right? At 300 millimeter, not even close. I can put the teleconverter, I can be at 420 at f4. This one's at 5.6. So again, I like to have that little bit extra subject isolation if I can make it work. So this worked out really well for me. I use this prime with the teleconverters most of the time, but that might be a little bit misleading because frankly, again, most of our guests had a 100 to 400. It worked out fine. They weren't really worried about it. I just happen to like this lens a lot and the way it renders and that, so I was using this pretty heavily. I also used, to a lesser extent, the Sony 24 to 105. This was my least used lens, but I still have some shots I really like with it, so I'm really glad I took it. So this is a basic coverage here. Now going over to the Nikon kit, we have the 100 to 400, which as I said, worked really, really well on the Z50 Mark II. Super light kit. My wife also used the 24 to 120 quite a bit. This was kind of the second most used lens in the Nikon kit. We have the 14 to 30 though. Did not end up using this once, did you? You didn't? No, she's shaking her head. Nope, she never used this lens. So this one gets to stay home next time. We're not going to take that. But for a Nikon kit, this worked out really, really well. So at this point, I want to show you a focal length chart though, because this is where I think the rubber meets the road, because there are a dozen different ways that you can make this trip fantastic. Because again, you have to think in terms of how much space and weight you're going to take, because the flights are restrictive going to the Galapagos. And if you have too much weight, you're not going to be able to make it work. So you have to prioritize kind of size and weight over everything else. And it's like, okay, so what is going to give you the most bang for your buck? So I think to help answer that question, I'm going to show you a chart right here. Okay, so here's my little chart. I made this little chart that basically I shot nearly 30,000 images, as you can see. And these are the ranges here. And I gave the primes each their own little slot here. So the 300 with the TC, and the 600, not all primes. Obviously, it's the 300 with the teleconverters, but the non-zoom focal lengths, we'll call them that. And as you can see, at 24 to 99, that was my least used. But I still have some shots I really like there, so I'm really glad that I had that wider lens. From 100 to 199, it's picking up a little bit. From 200 to 299, though, I fell back off. I didn't shoot quite as much there. But if you notice, the big range here starts at 300. That was my number one lens. And again, I think there's a little bias in there because I was deliberately using the 300. I wanted to use it at 2.8 a lot of times. So I would maneuver into position. I would zoom with my feet so that I could use it. But you can see 300 millimeter accounted for 9,200 images from this trip for me. Then from 301 to 400, this was with the 100 to 400, I had 2,300 images, so that's not insignificant. That's a lot of them too. And then we jumped over to 420, which is a 300 with the TC. So from 300 to 420, so that was definitely my range. And 420, you can also think is 400 millimeters, basically the same thing. So if you have, again, like a 100 to 400 millimeter lens, you're going to cover, I believe, about 77% of what you need. At least I would have covered 77% of what I needed on this trip. So that's a very significant range. However, if you notice, I also have a lot at 600 millimeter here, and I think that number is probably a little low. It should have been a little bit higher because there were more than a few times where I was at 420 millimeter and should have been at 600, but just was not able to get that teleconverter changed because I was in an action scenario. So maybe I started off at 420 and the subject was in good range, but it moved off a little bit. And it's like either I'm going to shoot it at 420 or I'm not going to get it at all, because by the time I switch TCs, I'm going to miss it. So 600 probably should have been used a little bit more. But again, you can see that it's not, does not have a majority share here in any way, shape, or form. So for me, I would not want to take something like a dedicated 600 millimeter with me just because the size and weight of the lens just isn't worth what you're sacrificing to bring it. So if you're taking a 600 f4, there's a good chance that that's going to max out your weight, and that's the only lens you're going to have. And it only accounts for, I think when I looked at all the numbers there, like 10, 12, 15% or something like that of my images. So I'm not going to take a big giant lens that's only going to account for a small percentage of my images. If I'm in Africa where I'm using the 600 f4 for 60, 70, 80% of my images, the 600 and the 600 with the TC, then yeah, that's a different story. But here it's just not as critical as it is in other locations. So again, there's a lot of ways you can get this, but I think that chart should be pretty helpful when you're thinking about, which focal lengths should I take on a trip to the Galapagos? You can see what worked well for me. Now, again, there's a lot of ways to get there. We had a lot of guests using just the 100 to 400. That worked great. The 100 to 400 on the Z50 Mark II was fantastic. A 180 to 600, another great choice. A Sony 200 to 600, another great choice, especially if you pair it with a shorter focal length. So with Nikon, for instance, maybe go the 24-120 plus the 180 to 600. Sweet setup. That's going to cover almost everything you're going to need. There's a little gap there, but I don't think that's insurmountable. You can back up or move forward as needed for that. And the same kind of applies to Sony. Canon has the 100 to 500, so that would be a fantastic lens. So if you wanted to go lightweight and with a minimum amount of gear, I would definitely consider those super zooms. The people that had them, it worked out really, really well. And they were able to concentrate on the shots instead of like me playing with teleconverters all the live long day. Okay, so I was working on the video, putting a slide together to kind of consolidate all this stuff so you can see it all on the screen at the same time. And it occurred to me I missed two important things. So let's take a look right now. So the first one is the extra memory cards, and another is an Apple AirTag. So extra memory cards, obviously you want to have an extra memory card or two in your bag. For me, I basically go back every time I'm done shooting. I back up to the computer and to two other drives, and then I format those memory cards once everything's safely backed up. So I don't need a ton of memory cards, but it's always good to have a few extras. Next, we have the Apple AirTag, and I like to keep one of those inside of my camera bag, kind of tucked away in a secret hidden little spot. So if the camera bag were to be, we'll just say misplaced, I'll be able to locate it again. But otherwise, you can see everything here that we had for the Nikon kit, and that was basically, we had the Z8, the Z50, the 24-120, and the 100-400. Those are the ones that I would take. We had the Ortlieb bag down there, the 35L plus the insert. Again, I would think about the 45L, I think, if I had to do it over, but yeah, the 35L worked pretty well too, and all the other stuff that we talked about. Over on the right, we have other ideas. We have, some Imodium and Pepto in case you have a sick stomach when you're out there. We have snacks, and knee pads aren't a bad thing, especially if you want to kneel down in the Zodiac. Sometimes the floors are not comfortable to kneel down, let me tell you. Obviously a water bottle, sunglasses, sunscreen, sun hat, all that sun stuff since you're right there on the equator. So let's move on to the next one, and this is the Sony page, and basically everything is the same here except for the Sony gear. Obviously, we have a pair of A2s, the 100-400, 24-105, and as you know, the 300-28. And of course, with the Sony, I was also using teleconverters, both the 1.4 and the 2X. But otherwise, these pages are pretty much identical. And as a bonus, I want to talk about my laptop. And I know this isn't really what's in my camera bag, but I did want to talk about the laptop contents because I have people ask me about that. What do you take as far as, laptops and cables and chargers and all that? So I use the Guri Gear Chobi 16 bag. Love it. Have been using it for years. Highly recommend it. The 16-book MacBook Pro, that's what I'm using right now, and it's a 4 terabyte with 64 gig of RAM. This couple years old at this point, I believe. So, I don't know if you can get that exact configuration now or not. Maybe something better even. But it's big, it's heavy. The reason I take it is because I do some post-processing. Sometimes I do videos on the road, and I need that extra horsepower. I think for most people, something like a MacBook Air would make more sense because it's lighter. This thing weighs several pounds. It's very heavy. Next, we want to have some kind of a card reader. The one pictured here is for the CFB cards, CF Express B cards. If you have the Sony, you'll need one for the CFA. And obviously, you have all your various chargers and cables. It's impossible to give you a good list of that because everyone is going to be a little bit different. For what it's worth, my charging strategy was basically to use the cable to charge the camera. So I didn't even take a dedicated charger. I just plugged the USB-C cable right into the charging port on the camera, the USB-C port on the camera, and I just charged the cameras directly from a little adapter that I had. It worked great. I didn't have to take an extra charger. But if you want to, take a dedicated charger, obviously go ahead and do that. And of course, make sure you have all your other cables. And then on the airplane, I like the noise canceling headphones in my Amazon Kindle. And for backup, I use a pair of Samsung 4GB T7 Shield drives. I have 2 of those. So basically, my backup strategy is I put my data on the computer first, on the laptop, and then I back up to 2 drives, and I keep everything as separated as I can. Now, in the Galapagos, I do not keep the T7 drive with me on my person like I do in other locations because I get wet a lot, and I don't want that drive in my pocket when I'm getting soaked. So, one of them's in the laptop bag, maybe one of them's back in the boat in the safe, and then, of course, I have a copy of all of that on the laptop. So, overall, it worked out really well. But some other things you might want to put in your laptop bag of obviously any medications, some snacks, hand sanitizer, and extra batteries that you can't fit into your normal bag. So if you have, too many batteries, too many extras, too many spares, you can always stick them in there. Hopefully this information has proved helpful to you. And if you learned something or this was helpful, give me a like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.